My daughter slid a paper across the table. Utilities, groceries, rent, your share. I stared at the number. $780. 30 years ago, I bought this house. Today, I was paying to stay in it. She called it fairness. I called it the funeral of family. I didn't argue, I just smiled. Because what she didn't know was that I'd already changed every password. I still remember the phone call that started it all. It was late autumn, the kind of afternoon where the light fades before you realize it. My daughter Lila's voice came through the static, warm and careful. "Mom," she said, "why don't you come stay with us for a while? The house feels too quiet since Dad passed. You shouldn't be alone." For a moment, I forgot how heavy my chest had felt. For months. Someone wanted me. My own child was reaching out. I could almost hear her smile through the line, and I said yes, before the word even made sense. The week I arrived, everything looked like comfort. Jared met me at the door, that perfect son-in-law grin on his face. Lila had baked an apple pie, her father's favorite, she said, and jazz played low in the background. The smell of cinnamon and butter wrapped around me like an old blanket. She poured tea into my favorite mug, the one with the chipped blue handle I thought I'd lost years ago. "You won't be alone anymore, Mom," she said, touching my hand. I remember thinking, maybe grief has softened her. Maybe we both get to start over. At night, I unpacked slowly, folding sweaters that still smelled faintly of cedar. The guest room had pale curtains and a rocking chair by the window. I smiled when I saw it. That chair had belonged to me once. Lila must have brought it from storage. I imagined myself sitting there, watching morning light spill in, the way I used to when she was little. But somehow, I never did. Every time I went to sit, something was always in the way. A pile of laundry, Jared's laptop, a half-folded blanket. It wasn't intentional, not really. But it was enough to keep me standing. The days fell into rhythm. I cooked breakfast, Lila rushed to answer emails, Jared kissed her cheek and left for work. In the evenings, we'd eat together. Salmon, vegetables, always healthy, and talk about how busy life had become. I told her stories about her father, about the way he used to whistle when he fixed the porch light. She smiled politely, but I could tell she'd heard enough. Still, I kept telling them, because when you lose the love of your life, you hang on to the stories. They're the only proof that you mattered somewhere once. One Sunday, as the leaves outside turned the color of rust, Lila walked into the kitchen and handed me a small envelope. "Mom," she said gently, "we talked about this, remember? Just a little something to help with bills." I frowned, not understanding. She smiled the way people do when they've already decided something. "We want you to feel like you're contributing." Contributing. I tucked the envelope into my pocket and said nothing. Later that night, I opened it. A list of household expenses neatly divided by 3. Groceries, utilities, rent, my share. I looked around the house, the photos on the mantel, the quilt I'd sewn for her wedding, the rocking chair that never stayed empty. And for the first time, everything felt staged, like I was an extra in someone else's movie. It's strange how betrayal doesn't always start loud. Sometimes it begins with good manners and a spreadsheet. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and tried to remember the last time Lila and I had laughed together without checking the time. And I thought about the little girl she once was, kneeling on the living room floor, scissors in hand, cutting out paper hearts for her father's birthday card. Back then, she used to say, "Mom, you do the letters, I'll do the hearts." She drew hearts. Now, she draws boundaries. The next morning, I made coffee and pretended nothing had changed. Lila asked if I wanted to go with her to the farmer's market. I said no, blaming a headache. When she left, the silence was thick enough to touch. I wandered through the house, fingers brushing the edges of picture frames. Each one told a story of us. Christmas mornings, graduations, that summer trip to Lake Superior where we built sand castles that didn't survive the tide. I used to think memories could anchor a family, but I was starting to realize they can also drown you if you cling too hard. By evening, the warmth that once filled the house had thinned. Conversations felt measured, smiles too brief. Even the air seemed colder. The rocking chair by the window stayed piled with laundry again. I stopped trying to move it. One night, while washing dishes, I heard them whispering in the next room, Lila and Jared. "She needs to learn to adjust," he said. "She's used to doing things her way," she replied. "Dad spoiled her." Then, softer. "We just have to make it fair." Fair. That word again. Fairness is funny. It always sounds righteous when you're the one doing the taking. I dried my hands, stood for a long time, and looked at my reflection in the window. For the first time, I didn't see a mother or a widow. I saw a woman standing in someone else's kitchen, paying rent for her own memories. That was the night I started writing everything down. Every receipt, every note, every change in tone. Not out of spite, but clarity. Because when love begins to look like bookkeeping, you better start keeping your own records. Maybe I should have said something then. Maybe I should have slammed a door, demanded answers, cried, anything. But instead, I did what mothers do best. I waited, I listened. I gave the benefit of the doubt until there was nothing left to give. Still, part of me hoped that one morning she'd walk into my room, sit on that rocking chair and say, "Mom, I'm sorry. I just wanted things to feel equal." But that morning never came. And maybe that's the thing about love. It doesn't vanish all at once. It fades slowly, like the light through those thin curtains, until one day you wake up and realize it's cold, and you don't know when it happened. I didn't know it yet, but that was the beginning of the end. The day I moved into that house, I thought I was returning home. Turns out I was just renting space in a memory that no longer belonged to me. If you've ever opened your heart to family and found a bill instead of a hug, stay with me, because this story isn't about losing a house. It's about finding your voice again, and maybe. If you've ever felt unseen in your own home, hit subscribe, share your story, and let's talk about what love should really cost. The first time Lila mentioned money, it sounded harmless. We were sitting at the kitchen table, sunlight spilling through the blinds, coffee still steaming. She smiled the way she always did before saying something rehearsed. "Mom," she began, "it's just fair. Everyone should contribute a little. It's better that way, clearer for everyone. Fair." That word again. I didn't argue. I just nodded and stirred my coffee until it went cold. Later, Jared added his piece, in that calm, managerial tone of his. "You use the heater the most, Martha. Winter bills are higher when you're here. We just want to split it evenly." He said it like he was doing me a favor, like he was teaching me how to be reasonable. I wanted to laugh, or maybe scream. This was the same house where I once rocked Lila to sleep by the fire. The same kitchen where her father patched up her scraped knees and taught her to measure flour. Now, it had price tags. Now, love came with a receipt. That night, I sat on my bed and wrote a check. My hand shook a little. I stared at my own name on the signature line, Martha Ellison, wondering when that name stopped meaning mother and started meaning bill payer. I told myself it was temporary, that maybe they were just stressed, trying to balance things. But deep down, I knew. When love turns into accounting, there's no balance left. The weeks rolled by like quiet storms. Lila became distant, polite in that brittle way that hides resentment. She'd text me about chores instead of talking. Can you clean the fridge? Did you remember to pay your share? Jared started leaving spreadsheets open on the counter, columns, totals, notes in yellow. My life had turned into a cell on someone else's budget plan. Once I tried to talk to her. I asked, "Honey, are we okay? You seem different." She sighed. "Mom, please don't make this dramatic. We're just trying to be fair. You raised me to be responsible, didn't you?" I wanted to say, "I raised you to be kind," but I didn't, because mothers swallow words more often than food. One evening, I found a note taped to the fridge. It read, "Your share for the week. Thank you. My share." I traced the handwriting, her handwriting, and remembered the little girl who once left me love notes that said, "I love you more than pancakes." Now, she was leaving me invoices. I started noticing small things, things that told me I was no longer part of us. The family photos were rearranged. My picture from their wedding had moved from the living room to the hallway. My seat at dinner wasn't really mine anymore. Sometimes Jared's laptop sat there, sometimes grocery bags. Even my mug, the one she gave me that said, "Home is where Mom is," disappeared into the back of a cabinet. And the rocking chair by the window? Still piled with laundry, still waiting for a space that never opened up. Every day felt colder, even when the heater hummed. I began to count things. How many dinners we ate together. How many times she said thank you. How many times she avoided looking me in the eye. That's the irony of being treated like a number. You start thinking in numbers too. One night, I overheard them again. Jared said, "She's not used to sharing responsibility. It's her pride." And Lila replied softly, "Dad spoiled her. That's why we're in this mess." I froze behind the door. Spoiled. That's what my love had become. Spoiled leftovers of a life they no longer wanted to remember. I wanted to burst in to tell her that her father worked 3 jobs to keep this roof over her head. That every dollar I saved was meant to make her life easier, not mine. But instead, I just stood there, quiet, invisible, the way they seemed to prefer me. That night, I sat by the window, the only place that still felt mine. Outside, the streetlights flickered like old memories refusing to die. I whispered to myself, fairness, when weaponized, becomes cruelty. And it was true. Because fairness had turned my daughter into a landlord, and me into a tenant in my own legacy. The next morning, I signed another check. This time, my hand didn't tremble. I wasn't doing it out of guilt anymore. I was collecting evidence, proof that love could be itemized and billed, proof that something sacred had been sold off, one transaction at a time. When I handed the envelope to Lila, she smiled, almost relieved. "See?" she said. "This makes things easier." I smiled back. "Yes," I whispered. "Easier." But in my chest, something shifted. It wasn't anger yet, not exactly. more like a quiet understanding that I'd been erased slowly, methodically, until only the bills remembered I existed. After that day, I spoke less. I moved through the house like a guest in a museum of my own life. I stopped arguing, stopped explaining, stopped hoping, because sometimes silence isn't surrender, it's reconnaissance. And even though they didn't notice, I had already started to plan. I didn't know how or when, but I promised myself one thing. They would learn that dignity can't be divided into thirds. If you've ever felt your kindness mistaken for weakness, if you've ever been made to pay for your own love, stay with me. Because this isn't where the story ends. It's just where I stopped asking for permission to exist. And if you believe no one should have to buy back their place in their family, then like, share, or tell me your story. Maybe together we can remind the world that love isn't a ledger. It happened on a Tuesday. Nothing dramatic, no storm, no shouting, just the quiet click of a mouse and the sound of my own breathing. I was checking my bank statements, the way widows do when they've learned to double-check everything. And there it was, $8,000 gone. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Some misplaced decimal, a delayed refund, anything. But the line said it clearly. Transfer to joint account. I don't have a joint account. At least, I didn't. When I asked Lila, she looked up from her phone like it was the most normal thing in the world. "Oh, Jared handled that," she said. "We just thought it'd be easier to manage things together." "Together?" I asked. She smiled politely. "You know, so we can keep track of bills and payments. One less thing for you to stress about." Then Jared appeared from the hallway, his voice smooth as always. "I moved it for efficiency, Martha. Don't worry, it's safe. I'm managing everything." Managing. Such a small word for something that feels like a theft. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I just stood there, the air thick between us. For a moment, I almost believed them. Almost believed that this was love disguised as help. But deep down, something cold settled in my chest. I realized love shouldn't require signatures. It shouldn't come with withdrawal slips. That night, I sat in my room with the lamp off and the laptop open. The glow from the screen painted everything blue and lonely. I typed each password I could remember, bank, insurance, emails, and changed them one by one. My fingers trembled, not from fear, but from clarity. For the first time in months, I was the only one who knew. Then I opened a drawer and took out a piece of stationery I'd been saving since my husband passed. I wrote, slowly, deliberately, "Patricia, if they ever ask, tell them I remember everything. Martha." I folded the letter and sealed it inside an envelope addressed to my lawyer. Then I took a deep breath and closed my laptop. The screen went black, and in that darkness, something inside me clicked back into place. Down the hall, I could hear them laughing at the TV, some sitcom about a perfect family. The canned laughter echoed, hollow, unreal. I wondered if they even noticed how quiet I'd become, how invisible. But invisibility can be useful. It lets you move without being watched. The next morning, I acted like nothing happened. Made coffee, fed the cat, asked Lila if she wanted toast. She smiled, half distracted, scrolling through her phone. "You don't have to worry about bills this month," she said. "We've got it handled." I smiled back. "Oh, I'm sure you do." When she left for work, I sat at the table, staring at the coffee mug her father used every morning before his heart attack. I remembered how he used to say, "Trust is like a lock. You only notice it when it's broken. I traced the rim of that cup and whispered to myself, "It's broken now, Henry, but I'm fixing it." Later that day, I went to the post office. The woman behind the counter didn't know she was witnessing a quiet revolution. I handed her the letter and said, "Certified, please." She asked if I wanted tracking. I smiled. "No, I already know where it's going." That night, I backed up my files, checked my accounts again, and created something new, a folder labeled "For When They Ask." Inside it, every statement, every receipt, every login. I wasn't planning revenge. I was preserving truth. Because when people try to rewrite your life, you keep your own copy. By midnight, the house was silent except for the ticking clock, the kind of silence that feels heavy enough to touch. I looked around the room, the same walls that once held laughter, birthdays, bedtime stories. Now, they held secrets. I whispered, "You took my money, but you won't take my memory." I thought about the years I spent teaching Lila about honesty, how we'd count coins in her little piggy bank, how I'd tell her, money's just paper, integrity's the real currency. Funny how lessons get lost when life gets comfortable. At some point, I stopped feeling angry. Anger burns too quickly. This was something colder, slower. Resolve. I wasn't helpless. I wasn't losing my mind. I was preparing. And as the clock struck midnight, I looked out the window and saw my reflection in the glass. For the first time, I didn't see a victim. I saw a woman learning to protect what she built. If you've ever had someone steal from you in the name of love, you know this feeling. The mix of heartbreak and focus. The quiet calculation that says, "Not again." That's where I was. Not plotting vengeance, just reclaiming authorship of my own life. They thought they'd simplified things by taking control. What they didn't realize was, so had I. Because when trust is gone, silence becomes strategy. And in silence, I was finally free to think. If you've ever reached that point too, where you stop explaining and start preparing, stick around. You'll want to hear what happens next. It was still early when I walked into the study. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, but light was crawling through the blinds, soft and gray. Something felt wrong before I even saw it. The drawer, the one I kept locked, was slightly open. Papers were scattered across the desk like fallen leaves. I froze. My first thought was, no one could have known the key was hidden under the vase. My second thought was that I'd been naive to think anyone wouldn't look. "Mom?" Lila's voice came from behind me, sharp, defensive. "Oh, you're up early." I turned. She was standing by the doorway, her eyes flicking between me and the mess. She started. Then Jared appeared, holding a folder. "We were organizing your finances," he said quickly. "You keep things outdated. We thought we'd make it easier for you." I stared at them both. The two people who were supposed to be my family, standing there like strangers who'd broken into a house they once owned. "Easier?" I asked quietly, "by taking what isn't yours?" Lila crossed her arms. "Mom, don't twist this. We were helping. You've made mistakes before. You forget where things are." Jared was just making sure everything's safe. Her words hit harder than I expected. Forget. That was the plan, wasn't it? Convince me I was too old, too tired, too fragile. I walked to the desk and picked up the papers, my bank statements, insurance, my husband's will, pages that still smelled faintly of his aftershave, the same ones I'd guarded for decades. "You had no right," I said, my voice steady but low. "No right to touch any of this." Jared sighed, a sound full of condescension. "You're being dramatic." We're trying to help you manage your assets before. Before what? I cut in. Before I die. Silence. Just the sound of the heater clicking. I looked at Lila, hoping to see a flicker of guilt, of the little girl who once held my hand in the grocery store, who used to say, "I'll never let anyone hurt you, Mom." But that girl was gone. "Where's the envelope that was in here?" I asked. They exchanged a glance. Too quick, too practiced. "What envelope?" Jared said. I didn't bother answering. I reached into my sweater pocket and pulled out a small silver key. It was cold against my fingers. Their eyes followed it. I walked to the bookshelf, crouched, and opened a small hidden drawer behind the bottom panel. Inside was a flash drive and an old letter, the paper yellowed, the handwriting familiar. My husband's. I held it up. "Found it," I said softly. "The things worth keeping don't need your management." Jared frowned. "What's that?" I smiled, a thin, tired smile. Proof that this home was built from love, not from ledgers. Lila's eyes welled up for a second, then hardened. "You're making a mistake, Mom. You can't keep doing this alone." "I've been alone for a while now," I said. "You just didn't notice." I walked past them, calm, unhurried. It wasn't anger anymore. It was clarity. The kind that feels like clean air after a storm. At the front door, I slipped on my coat and dialed a number I'd memorized years ago. "Patricia? It's Martha. Yes, it's time. Freeze everything." I paused, watching the light outside turn gold. "Yes, I'm sure. I'll start again." Behind me, Lila's voice broke the silence. "Mom, where are you going?" I turned the doorknob and looked at her for what felt like the last time. "Someplace peaceful," I said. "A place where I can afford to breathe." Then I stepped outside. The air was cold, almost biting, but it felt cleaner than anything inside that house. My feet crunched on the gravel driveway, each step steadier than the last. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Sometimes leaving doesn't mean running away. It means reclaiming what was taken. Your voice, your freedom, your name. As I reached my car, the rising sun caught the windshield, and for a brief second, I saw my reflection. Not a victim, not an old woman, just a person who remembered who she was before she started apologizing for existing. I sat behind the wheel, closed my eyes, and let the quiet fill me. For the first time in months, it wasn't the silence of suppression. It was peace. If you've ever had to walk away to save yourself, you'll understand this part. It's not about winning or losing. It's about finally choosing yourself. And if you've ever done that, or if you're still finding the courage to, stay here. You're not alone. Hit like, share your story, and let's remind the world, love built from ledgers isn't love at all. The first morning in my new apartment, I woke up before the sun. The air was quiet, no footsteps, no doors closing, no voices calling my name. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the faint cry of seagulls outside. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. Then I remembered. I'd left. I boiled water for tea, the same way I always did, but it tasted different. Maybe because this time it wasn't out of routine. It was survival. The place was small, one bedroom, one window, one table, but it felt honest. The walls didn't pretend to love me. The silence didn't judge. I turned on the old radio I'd carried with me through 3 houses and 1 marriage. It crackled before landing on a jazz station. The trumpet sounded like memory, soft, imperfect, human. I smiled. Peace costs less than rent. I thought that, then said it out loud, just to hear how it sounded. I spent the day unpacking boxes, each one a chapter of my life. The framed picture of my wedding day went on the shelf. My husband's watch, still working, on the nightstand. A few books, a teacup with a chip, and a single pansy cutting in a glass of water. That was enough. In the afternoon, I sat by the window overlooking the lake. The water shimmered even in the cold, like it was trying to remind me that life moves. Always. I opened an old envelope, one I'd kept sealed since the day my husband died. Inside was a note written in his neat, patient handwriting. If ever the world turns against you, stay kind. It will shame them faster. I read it 3 times. The first time as his wife, the second as a mother, the third as a woman learning how to exist without either title. He was right. Kindness isn't weakness. It's endurance. It's the quiet defiance of people who refuse to let bitterness own them. That night, I cooked myself dinner. Nothing fancy, just soup and toast. But I ate it slowly, without rushing to clean up after anyone else. I realized I hadn't done that in years. When I washed the dishes, I caught my reflection in the window. My hair had more gray now, but my eyes looked steadier. Not happy, exactly, just awake. I thought of Lila and Jared, and instead of anger, I felt something else. Space, distance, like the fog lifting after a storm. I finally saw the truth of it all. They didn't just want my money. They wanted my permission to stop seeing me as a person. And I'd almost given it, but not anymore. In the quiet, I made a list. Not of bills or chores, but of small promises to myself. 1. Never apologize for outliving people's expectations. 2. Protect peace like its inheritance. 3. Remember, silence isn't surrender. Sometimes it's strategy. Outside, the streetlights flickered on. The lake glowed silver, and somewhere, a train passed in the distance. I wondered if Lila noticed the emptiness of the house yet, if she stood in the kitchen and realized how quiet cruelty sounds when it's alone. Maybe one day she would understand, but understanding wasn't my job anymore. My job was to heal. I brewed another cup of tea and held it close, the warmth seeping into my palms. "You did the right thing," I whispered, not to anyone in particular. Maybe to myself, maybe to him, maybe to the woman I used to be, the one who kept forgiving long after it was safe. When I finally went to bed, the sheet smelled like lavender detergent, new and unfamiliar. I lay there, eyes open, watching the faint reflection of city lights on the ceiling. I thought about the word home, how people always assume it's a place, when really, it's a feeling. It's the moment you realize you don't have to ask permission to rest. I didn't have much, not the house, not the savings, not the version of family I thought would last. But I had a key that opened a door no one else had a copy of, and that was enough. Before turning off the light, I wrote a note to myself and left it on the nightstand. You survived. Now, live. And if you've ever had to rebuild your peace from scratch, if you've ever found strength in the smallest, quietest places, then you know what this feels like. Because peace isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It just sits beside you, softly breathing, waiting for you to notice. If you understand that kind of peace, stay a little longer. Share this story. Tell yours. Sometimes the quietest victories are the ones that echo the longest. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not just the air, the feeling. That kind of chill that comes from realizing your own child is sitting across from you, not beside you. Lila wouldn't look at me. Jared kept whispering in her ear, his hand on her shoulder like he owned both the moment and her. My lawyer, Patricia, leaned in and said quietly, "Just tell the truth, Martha. You don't have to perform. The truth will sound enough like love." The judge entered. Everyone stood. When we sat down, the gavel hit once, and with that sound, I felt my heart steady. I'd raised my voice plenty in my life, but this was the first time silence was going to defend me. The opposing lawyer started. His words were polished, rehearsed. My clients, Lila and Jared Thompson, are petitioning for guardianship over Mrs. Martha Ellison, citing concerns about cognitive decline and mismanagement of funds. Cognitive decline. I almost laughed. I'd managed a household, a business, and a husband who couldn't even balance a checkbook. Now suddenly I was unfit to manage my own name? They showed photos of my house, my former house, talking about clutter, stress, confusion. I saw Lila nodding along, my daughter, my little girl who once cried because I wouldn't let her quit piano lessons. I used to tell her, "Someday, discipline will save you." Now here she was, disciplined enough to destroy me with a straight face. When it was my turn to speak, Patricia stood. "Mrs. Ellison, can you tell the court what happened the day you left your home?" I took a breath. I left because peace was cheaper than rent. A few chuckles scattered in the back. They told me it was for my own good. That I couldn't handle my finances, but every dollar that exists in their accounts began in mine. Every wall they lean on was built by my hands and my late husband's labor. I didn't forget anything. I just finally remembered myself. The opposing lawyer objected, claiming irrelevance. The judge allowed me to continue. Maybe she recognized that some truths are too heavy for neat legal categories. Lila looked pale. Her eyes shimmered with something between anger and regret. When I met her gaze, she said softly, "We were just trying to protect you, Mom." I shook my head. "No, sweetheart. You weren't protecting me. You were replacing me." The words hung in the air like smoke. Jared shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat. "She's twisting everything, Your Honor. She doesn't know what's best for her anymore." I turned toward him. "You're right. Jared, I don't know what's best for me anymore, but I know what's wrong, and it's pretending love means control." Patricia rested a hand on my arm, whispering, "Perfect. Let it breathe." The judge finally spoke. Her voice was calm but firm. "Mrs. Ellison, have you undergone any medical assessments regarding your mental capacity?" "Yes," I said. "Two, actually. Both say I'm fine. The only thing I'm losing is patience." That earned another quiet laugh from the back row. Even the court stenographer looked like she wanted to smile. The judge turned to Lila. "Ms. Thompson, what specific evidence do you have of your mother's alleged incapacity?" Lila hesitated. She flipped through papers, her fingers trembling slightly. "She's been forgetful, withdrawn. She gave away her home." "I didn't give it away," I said, gently. I walked away from people who forgot how to treat me like a person. For the first time, the room went completely still. Lila's eyes filled. "We thought you couldn't handle it." I felt something in me soften. Not forgiveness yet, just understanding. "I handled you," I said, "for 40 years. The judge sat back, thoughtful. Then she said, almost like a mother herself, "I see no signs of incapacity here, only integrity." The gavel came down again, a sound so sharp it seemed to cut through months of shame, fear, and silence. "Case dismissed." Patricia squeezed my hand. Told you, she whispered. The truth always sounds like love when it's finally spoken. I turned to Lila. She looked smaller somehow, like a child again. For a split second, I almost reached out to her, but I stopped. Love doesn't mean rescuing someone from their own lessons. Sometimes love is standing still and letting them face what they built. Outside the courthouse, the sunlight hit my face. It wasn't warm yet, but it felt honest. Patricia handed me the final papers. You're free, Martha. Free. The word didn't sound triumphant. It sounded peaceful. I looked up at the courthouse steps, thinking of all the women who'd climbed them before me, shaking, uncertain, but brave enough to say, no more. Maybe they didn't win every time, but today, one did. If you've ever had to stand alone to prove you still belong to yourself, this part is for you. Because sometimes justice doesn't shout. Sometimes it whispers back. You're still here. If that line means something to you, share this story. Maybe it'll remind someone out there that integrity doesn't age. It endures. The day after the verdict, I woke up to sunlight filling the apartment like a quiet apology from the world. For the first time in months, I didn't wake up bracing for battle. The air felt still, honest. I sat by the window with my cup of tea, watching a group of women walk their dogs by the lake. They laughed about something small, something ordinary. And for a moment, I thought, this is what dignity sounds like. Not applause, not noise, just peace that doesn't need defending. When the reporters first called, I almost said no. I didn't want to become a story. I'd spent my whole life being one for other people. The wife who stayed strong, the mother who forgave too much, the woman who handled it. But Patricia said, Martha, this isn't about fame. It's about voice. So I said yes. The day of the interview, they came with cameras and questions that tried to make my pain fit into headlines. What made you start the Ellison Trust? One of them asked. I looked at the camera and smiled softly. Because some stories aren't about revenge, I said. They're about rewriting dignity. They wanted statistics, but I gave them stories. I told them about Helen, the 74-year-old who called crying after her son emptied her savings. About Marjorie, who hadn't dared touch her own checkbook in years. About the hundreds of women who thought losing their money meant losing their worth. The Ellison Trust, I said, exists so they don't have to beg to be believed. It's not charity. It's restitution of respect. The interviewer leaned forward. What does empowerment mean to you, Mrs. Ellison? I thought for a long time before answering. Empowerment isn't loud. It's orderly. It's knowing where every dollar of your life goes and making sure none of it is stolen in the name of love. They all went quiet after that. You could feel it in the room, the kind of silence that means truth has landed. After they left, I stood in front of the mirror to take off the microphone. And, for a second, I barely recognized the woman looking back. Her shoulders weren't heavy anymore. Her eyes didn't search for permission to exist. I realized that what they'd tried to take from me was never money. It was authorship, the right to define my own worth. A week later, the first support group met in a small community hall by the library. 12 women showed up. 12 stories that sounded different but hurt the same. We started slow, hesitant smiles, trembling voices. But by the end of the night, there was laughter, even hope. One of them said, I thought I was the only one. I told her, we all think that until someone else speaks first. That night, walking home, I passed the courthouse where everything had fallen apart and then been rebuilt. The steps looked less intimidating now, the walls less cold. Justice, I realized, isn't an event, it's a foundation. You build it piece by piece, case by case, truth by truth. A few days later, a letter arrived. No name on the front, just my address written in neat, careful handwriting. Inside was a note from a woman in Ohio. You don't know me, but your story made me change the locks on my own life. Thank you for reminding me that I still matter. I held that letter to my chest and cried. Not out of sadness, but out of recognition. The kind that says, you didn't go through this for nothing. I looked out the window again, the city lights blinking against the water. Somewhere, another woman was reading that same headline, whispering to herself, maybe I can start again too. And that was enough. People sometimes ask if I ever regret taking them to court. I tell them no, because forgiveness without accountability is just permission for it to happen again. I don't hate Lila. I don't even think I could. She's still my daughter. But love doesn't mean returning to the same fire once you've learned how to build your own warmth. Every month, when the Ellison Trust funds a new legal defense or helps another woman reclaim her name, I whisper the same words my husband once wrote to me. Stay kind. It will shame them faster. Kindness, I've learned, isn't weakness. It's the quiet strength to rebuild when no one claps for you. It's planting seeds knowing you may never sit in their shade. If you've ever been torn down for daring to stand up, remember this. Dignity doesn't vanish. It waits for you to reclaim it. And if you're listening right now, maybe you're the next person to build something from the ashes of your silence. If this story spoke to you, share it, not for me, but for someone who still needs to hear that it's never too late to start again. It was late afternoon when the phone rang. The number wasn't saved, but I knew that silence before the first word. That small pause when someone rehearses a sentence they've been afraid to say. Mom? Lila's voice cracked through the receiver. For a moment, I couldn't answer. I just listened to her breathing, heavy, uneven. The sound of someone standing on the edge of truth. I left him, she said. I left Jared. The world seemed to stop for a second. Outside my window, the wind moved the curtains, like the room was exhaling for me. She went on, her words tumbling fast, like confession and collapse all at once. I told the authorities everything about the accounts, about what he made me sign, about how I let it happen. I closed my eyes. I could almost see her. Shoulders hunched, hair messy, mascara smudged from regret. For a long time, I dreamed of this call, imagined her finally seeing what I'd seen all along. But standing in that moment, I didn't feel victory, just a quiet ache. I'm sorry, Mom, she whispered. I thought I was protecting us. I took a breath, steady and slow. It's not apology that heals, Lila, I said. It's accountability. Silence. Then a quiet sob, the kind that comes from realizing you can't undo what's already burned. I know, she said, finally. I know. The next day, she asked to meet. We chose neutral ground, a hospital cafe where she was volunteering. The place smelled of coffee and antiseptic, a strange mix of comfort and consequence. She looked smaller in person, or maybe just human again. When she sat down, she reached across the table like she wanted to bridge a canyon with her fingertips. I've started therapy, she said. I wanted you to know. I nodded. Good. Start with yourself. The rest follows. There was a long pause. Then quietly, she said, I miss Dad. I think he'd hate what I became. I met her eyes. He'd hate what happened, not who you are now. People can change, Lila. The question is, will you let the change last after it stops hurting? Her eyes filled again, but she smiled through it. You sound just like him, she said. I laughed softly. I sound like the woman who finally listened to him. When we left the cafe, the sky had that washed-out white light that comes before rain. We stood by the glass doors for a moment, not hugging, not saying goodbye. Just breathing the same air for the first time in years, without accusation between us. As I walked away, I looked back. She was watching me, her hands in her pockets, her expression something between sorrow and hope. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But maybe it was the beginning of understanding. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the city lights blur in the drizzle. I thought about all the bridges that had burned in my life, some from anger, some from mercy. And I realized, not every fire is destruction. Some fires are purification. Some bridges burn because the fire was necessary. I whispered it aloud. And it didn't sound bitter. It sounded like truth. I reached for the letter I kept from my husband, the one I used to read when the world felt too loud. I unfolded it again, the paper thin now from all the years of being touched, his handwriting still steady, still gentle. The universe remembers every act, especially the quiet ones. I smiled. Maybe it does. Maybe it remembered the night I walked away and the morning I didn't look back. Maybe it remembered this call, this fragile, trembling bridge between mother and daughter that somehow hadn't completely fallen apart. Outside, dawn began to spread, like a soft watercolor. A single bloom on the windowsill, one I'd planted weeks ago, had finally opened. I touched the glass and whispered, "It's okay now." Because sometimes the most important part of forgiveness isn't saying it. It's living in a way that proves it was worth giving. If you've ever waited for someone to change, or learned how to heal without their apology, this story is for you. Because even when the fire fades, something always blooms. And maybe, just maybe, it's you. The garden behind the old library had been forgotten for years. Weeds taller than benches, cracked soil, a silence that wasn't peaceful but abandoned. When I asked the librarian if I could tend it, she looked surprised. "No one's cared for that place in a decade," she said. I smiled. Then it's about time someone listened to it again. So, I started small. Just one morning a week. Gloves, shears, and a paper bag full of pansy seedlings. The ground was hard at first, dry, unyielding, but that felt familiar. Life hardens when love gets taken for granted. Still, I kept digging. Little by little, the dirt gave way, and under all that neglect, there was still earth ready to hold something new. Neighbors began to stop by. At first just curious, then with coffee, then with stories. One woman told me her daughter hadn't called in 2 years. Another said her son only visited when he needed money. I didn't give them advice, I just listened. It's strange how healing begins in silence. Not the kind that ignores, but the kind that witnesses. When the first pansy bloomed, it was a deep lavender. I laughed quietly to myself. If survival has a color, I thought, it's lavender. Soft, but it stays. Each flower that followed felt like a small act of defiance. Proof that beauty could return to places written off as done. Maybe that's what we all are. Gardens people stopped believing could grow. Sometimes, when the sun hit the water just right, I'd sit on the bench and think about Lila. I didn't resent her anymore. I didn't forgive her for her sake either. I forgave her because I wanted peace that wasn't borrowed, the kind that didn't depend on anyone understanding what I'd been through. Peace, I learned, isn't silence. It's knowing which battles deserve your voice and which deserve your quiet. The day the library opened the garden to the public, a group of kids ran between the flower beds laughing. A little girl pointed to a patch of pansies and said, "They look like they're listening." I smiled. "They are," I said. "They listen better than most people do." Later, as everyone left, I stayed behind. The air smelled of soil and sunlight, of things reborn. I knelt by the lavender blooms and pressed my palm into the earth. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a survivor or a victim, just someone who'd come full circle. My life had started with giving love, giving time, giving trust. Somewhere along the way, I'd learned to give to myself too. And that, I realized, wasn't selfish. It was sacred. If you've ever been treated like a guest in your own life, maybe it's time to reclaim your garden. Plant something, even if it's small. Speak when it matters. Stay silent when it protects your peace. And if this story found you today, maybe that's the universe reminding you. Quiet doesn't mean powerless. Growth doesn't ask for permission. Because even after betrayal, after storms, after loss, the garden still listens. Comment your story below. Let's make silence expensive and dignity impossible to steal again.